Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another edition of Film Swap.
Hello.
Hello, Jonathan. This is my awesome co-host, the ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jonathan, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, David. Thank you very much.
I think I can speak on behalf of our listeners when I say happy belated birthday. You recently had a birthday.
Yep, since our last episode, I've had another birthday.
Yes, awesome. So that's great. And did it go well? Did you have a nice time?
A very wet day, but yeah, it was basically enjoyable. It's one of those days when we had lots of sort of April, not showers, but squalls.
Yes.
Intense
that's
storms.
good. And you did something nice with the family? You went out somewhere? You did something cool?
Yes, we went out and that's where we got rained on quite a lot. It was all right.
Well, that's part of the fun of living in England in April, isn't it? Is the old April showers come thick and fast and completely out of the blue.
Exactly.
Sometimes.
Exactly.
So, Jonathan, why don't you tell us a little bit about tonight's show?
Well, tonight's show, our theme is moral outrage! Exclamation mark.
Oh, that just makes me mad. Gets me hot under the collar. Ooh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the sort of the idea being these are films which have at one stage morally outraged viewers or critics or maybe the board of film classification, and somebody has been outraged anyway. Yes. And that's the idea behind it, really.
Well, what does it take to get you angry? What makes you get upset? What would outrage you?
I guess one thing that gets me upset is really cheesy films.
Yeah.
If they're too hackneyed.
Can you give me an example of a really outrageously cheesy film?
Well, I do remember watching an Arnold Schwarzenegger film many, many years ago, and it was just so utterly schlocky that it just drove me round the bend. I was no, it's just so naff. That's one thing I really remember, just being utterly riled by.
Well, yeah, sometimes if you see the certain types of films, they just make you mad, don't they? Because they're just so usually when they kind of insult your intelligence so much, or they're just so formulaic or so predictable that you just feel outraged. That's what annoys me when it comes to films. Those are the kind of things because I quite like a bad film. Like I kind of like when those sort of so bad they're good kind of films. I love films like that. But for me, like if it's a big budget Hollywood film with big stars, lots of talent in it,
yes,
but they just kind of phone it in, and there's just nothing redeeming about it. That makes me mad.
I think that's basically what it was. I think it may have been Twins with Danny DeVito as well as Arnold Schwarzenegger.
All right. I must admit that I haven't seen that film since it was kind of like a new film back when was that like kind of a 90s?
In 88.
Kind of one? 88,
I think I saw it sort of about 3 years later on TV.
Okay. Well, I've got to be honest, I don't remember it, so I can't really, I only have very, very vague recollections of it, and I can't really even remember whether I liked it or not. It's been that long, and it obviously made that much of an impression on me. So
exactly, I think
there's lots of films I've seen long before that, even that I still remember. If I really like them, I still remember and have some kind of memory of them, even if I haven't seen them for a long time. But,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A good film can stay with you, most certainly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's fair to say that the two films we're talking about tonight are definitely films that stay with you. These are two absolute classics of
They are.
British cinema. From two of, I think it's safe to say, two of the most significant British filmmakers. I mean, they would be right up there in
Without
the
a doubt.
big leagues in terms of talent that's come out of this country.
Yeah.
So, well, would you like to start by introducing your film?
My film is The Devils. It's directed
Yes.
by Ken Russell, and it was released in 1971. And it stars Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave.
Yes.
And it's set in 17th century France. It's a rip-roaring, rollicking tale, of which
Yes.
more later.
Yes, extraordinary. Well, I'm really looking forward to digging into that one because it's a favorite of mine and quite an extraordinary, singular piece of work and really great. And I'm quite keen to talk more about it and convince people that they should go check it out if they've never seen it.
Definitely.
My film tonight is from 1960, about a decade earlier, and it's called Peeping Tom. And it was directed by the great Michael Powell, the same man who brought you the Red Shoes and 49th Parallel and many, many other really great films. I Know Where I'm Going was another really great one. So a pretty significant director. I think it's fair to say, though, this was like, if not his last film, it was certainly his last major film that he got to make. And it's mainly partly due to the reaction that it had at the time because it was so incendiary and so provocative and challenging and boundary pushing that there was a huge kind of backlash about it, at least in Britain, which resulted in effectively sort of stopping him from getting any more significant work afterwards.
Yeah.
Which is a real shame because this is a really extraordinary film, quite powerful and in many ways. So that's my film tonight, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it in just a couple of minutes. Well, that's from the listener's perspective. It's going to be just a couple of minutes. But Jonathan, you and I are going to go away now. We're going to sit down in our leaky old garage with hopefully not slip on the oil puddles that are laid about all over, and we're going to project these films up onto the wall, and after we're done watching them, if we haven't caught pneumonia, we're then going to come back and talk about them here. So listeners, don't go away because it literally is just going to be a few seconds, and then we'll be right back. And we're back.
Hello.
We're back, and what a couple of really great films. I'm really looking forward to talking about it. Listeners and viewers, just a quick reminder that it'd be really great if you could just take a second to hit that subscribe or follow button, because as you know, we are at the mercy of big tech and their algorithms and all that kind of stuff. So it really helps us out if you can just hit on those little buttons and give our numbers a little boost, because then that helps us to get thrown out in front of a few more people out there. So if you're listening to us on the podcast, please follow. And if you are watching us on YouTube or on Spotify, just click that subscribe button and maybe leave us a little review or something, or give us a little
Review
rating.
would be great.
Yeah, because that really helps us out. We got a lot of really exciting things coming up in the next few shows. We've actually got some guest slots coming up. We're actually going to bring in some special guests to do a swap with. So me and Jonathan are going to be able to broaden the conversation there. And we've got some really exciting guests that we're lining up coming up over the next weeks and months. So definitely you want to stay tuned for that. And we've also got our delayed anime show coming up that we're going to do soon. And we've also got some other prizes and surprises coming up. We've got our film swap factoids that are going out once or twice a week out on YouTube there. So by all means, keep an eye out because we got lots of exciting things coming up very soon.
Yeah.
And on that note, talking about exciting, shall we dig into our first film tonight, Jono?
Let's dig into the first one.
Great. Well, I mentioned a little bit about Peeping Tom. This is my film, so I'll give it a really, really brief introduction just to set the stage. This film came out in 1960, and as I mentioned, it was directed by the great Michael Powell, who had already a track record, an amazing track record of some extraordinary motion pictures behind him. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, A Canterbury Tale, I Know Where I'm Going, which I mentioned already, A Matter of Life and Death, Black Narcissus, which is an absolutely amazing film, The Red Shoes, which is extraordinary, and The Tales of Hoffman. So that's the man's CV, even before he got to the film that we're talking about tonight.
An extraordinary roster of films.
Yes, absolutely, an amazing talent and a major British filmmaker. This, as I said, ended up being one of his final films, mainly because there was a huge backlash. The film is essentially about a serial killer. And this is long before the days of, sort of the Freddy Krueger and Friday the 13th and all these kind of things. But you can certainly trace the lineage of those films back to this one.
Yes.
Because I think this film, sort of laid some of the central tropes that you see in later on in the sort of 70s and 80s and all those slasher films.
I think so.
But I would say, having said that this film has considerably more depth and resonance to it than a lot of those films do, considerably more going for it in terms of its value, I think, as a artistic statement, if you will. I mean, we try to avoid these lofty terms and things like that, but I think it's fair to say that both of the films that we're talking about tonight, it's not unfounded to call them masterpieces, is it? They're both.
No, I suppose that's true. Yep.
Yeah, master pieces from master filmmakers, really. It's really as simple as that. So this film, as I said, is about a person who obsessively films other people, which is why it's called Peeping Tom, because he's compulsively takes a camera around with him and films people. What he's trying to capture on film is fear itself, fear in the face, in the manners of his victims. He's a very shy person who keeps to himself mainly. He works, I think, as a focus puller, is it, on
He's
film
a focus
sets?
puller, yeah.
And but he has his own ambitions to be a filmmaker himself.
Yes.
And so in his spare time, he has some camera equipment and things, and he goes around and he films people. And he also takes photographs, doesn't he? He works for someone who sells sort of nudie photographs in a little corner shop.
Yes.
Just sort of under the counter in sort of brown paper bags kind of stuff. And so he works in a little studio taking photographs. I guess what they would call in Britain, they call it glamour photography, where they take sort of topless pictures of women and things and then sell them over the counter. So this is someone who he develops a friendship with a young lady who lives in his apartment building, which he owns. It turns out that his father was a famous doctor. Yeah. And he owned the building, and so he lives in the top floor flat, and then he rents the rest of the building out to tenants. And one of the tenants is a young lady who takes an interest in him. She notices this shy young man who kind of sneaks in and out of the building, and one day she kind of confronts him and tries to befriend him, and that sets the stage for what ends up happening. And of course, we don't do spoilers on this show, or at least we try and avoid them. So I think from there, I'm going to leave it in terms of summarizing the film in terms of story and plot.
Yeah.
And we can talk a little bit more about the rest of it. So, Jonathan, what did you think of Peeping Tom? Was this your first time with Peeping Tom?
It was. I hadn't seen it before. I'd heard of it. I'd heard that it was it's one of the legendary films, and the film that sort of is known for putting an end to the career of Michael Powell. And but I also know that Martin Scorsese is a great fan of the film. I mean, Martin Scorsese is Michael Powell's sort of number one fan, basically.
Definitely. And he was responsible for sort of saving this film. He sort of rescued it from oblivion and had it restored and reissued in the United States in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, after Martin Scorsese sort of had established himself with a couple of big films, he has devoted a lot of his energies to helping to preserve and restore and rescue old films, not just British and American films, but films from all over the world.
Yeah.
His World Film Foundation is amazing, and
Yeah.
they do some amazing work at saving films from all over the world, Africa, South America, Europe, everywhere. So he's a great, I'm a great fan of Scorsese, even
100%.
just aside from the great films he makes.
Yeah.
It's also just because his absolute love and devotion to film, really, and saving it. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Completely agree.
So sorry, yeah, Jonathan, you were saying because he rescued the film and
Yes,
he's
so
a
I'd
big
heard of
fan.
it because I'd sort of read some articles about Martin Scorsese and his love of sort of British film, especially the Archers films, which is Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger's films together. They made in the 40s, all those films you mentioned earlier. But I'd never seen it. And so it was, really exciting to see the film. And I suppose I was maybe surprised it was in colour. I don't know. I guess 1960, some films were in colour, some weren't, especially a sort of relatively low budget one like this. Could have been black and white,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. And yes, I really enjoyed it. It's sort of quite a creepy film, could you say?
Oh yeah,
Um,
definitely.
Very creepy.
It's not like in the sense of, because sometimes when you see films about crazy serial killers and demented people and stuff in a lot of horror films and things, that this isn't like that. He's very much a real person,
Yeah,
really quiet and
yeah.
unassuming personality on the surface, but he is very, creepy and a little bit weird, and all those things are brought out very subtly and
Yes,
over the course of the film.
because he is the sort of anti-hero of the film, isn't he?
Hmm.
And you definitely feel sympathy for him, which is something you don't generally feel for most serial killers in films. I mean, there are some, but
Yeah.
generally not. And all the other characters. One of the other things that I really enjoyed was just sort of seeing London in 1960 or 1959. I suppose they might probably filmed it then, and just how different it is, and how sort of Victorian it was back then.
Yes.
Apart from anything else, these sort of alleys and just endless bricks everywhere. I guess there's a lot more glass and cement now,
Yeah.
and everything. A lot of the buildings have been sort of cleaned up from all the soot. But back then, they're less. Everything's just shabby,
Well,
and
this would only be sort of like 10, 15 years after after the Second World War, really. So
yeah,
Britain had quite a long recovery from. It wasn't like the United States where they had a big, huge economic boom sort of almost immediately after the war. It was like England had really
yeah,
suffered quite a lot of economic and social damage from the war, and
definitely.
it took a really long time for it to kind of start to bounce back from that.
Yeah, well, I
And this, I
remember
think, film is just on the cusp of that sort of that time when things started to pick up.
exactly. I remember my mum saying how there used to be a car park on Oxford Street, which was on the site of an old sort of building that had been bombed, destroyed and that was in the 60s. So there were still bomb sites then, even on
Yeah,
Oxford Street, prime real estate. Anyway, but I enjoyed that. I enjoyed. It's got lots of sort of unusual techniques, I suppose. So you see through his the viewfinder of his sort of cine camera, little camera he carries around. You see some of his films that he makes as well, which are little sort of Super 8, small black and white films. And then some of those, well, there's one of them was a picture of somebody or a film of somebody sleeping, which remind somebody who obviously doesn't know that they're being filmed by this guy, this creepy guy. But it reminded me of this installation by the American artist Bill Viola. And he has this one of his installations I remember seeing with all these just people sleeping, and obviously they were you know asked to be in his project, but this is sort of supposedly these people are being sort of peeped on whilst they sleep, which is sort of creepy, but it's sort of also sort of slightly like an art project as well. Maybe later Andy Warhol did similar things with people sleeping as well. Yeah, it's very sort of psychological. I guess it's quite similar in some ways to Psycho. Can we say that?
Which they kind of came out around the same time, didn't they? They were quite within, I guess, because what was Psycho about 1960 as well? So
I think it was the same within months of each other.
Yeah. And I think even Michael Powell even used to like work as an assistant director or something on Alfred Hitchcock's films back when Hitchcock was still working in Britain before he made the move to Hollywood.
I read that.
So I think there was a relationship, a friendship there. They were aware of each other. So it's quite interesting that they both made films that were very similar thematically in terms of these stories of, these troubled individuals with sort of fixations on their parents and the sort of their experiences and relationships with their parents and how that's affected them in quite sinister and unpleasant ways. So that is very interesting, the parallel there.
Definitely. And I mean, perfect for a double bill, I'm sure.
Yeah, they might be. Yeah, definitely.
Some
but it's quite sad to think, because Psycho obviously was like this huge, phenomenal blockbuster, massively, huge, popular film. Yet this film, which deals with quite similar themes and things, where was of course quite the opposite. It was a film that's only later earned its reputation and gained in status, but at the time it was thoroughly disgusted all the critics and appalled and upset everyone, and it was quickly shuffled away, and people tried to forget about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that wouldn't be such a problem, but the saddest sort of outcome was that the director, who obviously, I mean, I would imagine had a lot of more creative spark left, and he could have made some more great movies, never got the opportunity because of that.
Yeah, and it's extraordinary that just one film would do that, because you would think someone with that kind of track record and having so many classic great films under his belt, even if he'd had one film that wasn't particularly successful, you would have thought people would have given him a bit of latitude there. But instead, because of the nature of the subject matter, and because at the time, I mean, today we take it for granted. We get films like this all the time about sinister killers and serial killers. I mean, they have TV shows about serial killers on once a week and stuff. But at the time that this film came out, it was quite boundary pushing and quite unexpected. People just were not used to, because by today's standards, I don't think this film is particularly strong in terms of some of the imagery and stuff we see things nowadays on just television shows that are probably stronger in terms of violence or sort of subject matter.
Definitely.
Yet this film just completely appalled people, and they were completely sort of taken aback by it. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
But I think that might be partly due to the nature of, because it kind of hits close to the bone, doesn't it? Even now, watching the film, it gets quite some of the scenes are quite effective and quite disturbing and quite unsettling.
definitely. And I mean, I guess they say that you're put in the viewer is put in the role of the peeping Tom.
Yes, definitely.
And I suppose
Yeah.
one of the other differences with sort of Psycho is that because this film is color, you're not given the sort of it's not at one remove. I think there isn't any blood in it really, not like in
No.
not much, not like
No,
whereas
there isn't. I don't think there's any at all. There's not really any
no,
blood.
there isn't any blood.
Uh,
Whereas
but the
Psycho
violence
obviously,
is much more sinister because it kind of really puts you into it in a way that even Psycho doesn't really do, does it?
well,
And it also gives you the psychology of the character because they go a lot into the details of the relationship of his father and the way he was treated, and a lot of those things are really uncomfortable
yeah,
and disturbing in their quality, right? Because they're presented in quite a matter of fact way almost.
yes, yeah. Well, his problems are as a result of his father essentially being a sort of psychologist, I guess,
Yeah,
and
he was basically using him as a guinea pig,
guinea
and
pig. Exactly.
obviously a child who's not able to consent, and
Yeah.
he was being subjected to these psychological sort of experiments about it to see how he would react. And obviously that then has the repercussions later on in terms of his psyche and the and how that manifests itself in his behavior later on.
Yeah. I believe Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, his mother was a child psychologist and used to sort of dye his food different colours and
All
put it
right.
on so he'd have a sort of completely blue meal or a completely red meal and things like that. I read an
All
interview where
right.
he said that. But luckily he just went on to make music.
Well, yeah. I guess, yeah. He managed to channel that constructively, creatively, in something.
Yeah.
But I suppose this character is trying to do that as well. But it's obviously in an unhealthy way,
Yes.
ultimately,
He is making
because
a
that
film.
creative urge of, I mean, certainly we can understand that we make videos and films and stuff, but there is a certain thing like a compulsion that compels you to do this, to do whatever kind of creative things you do, whatever kind of artists and musicians and stuff. There is a bit of a compulsion side of it,
Yeah. But
and
what
this
one of
film captures that really well, doesn't it?
it does, yes. And one of the other things, I guess, is it's slightly ahead of its time in that the then he's this character who's obsessed with filming everything, but now we're all obsessed with filming things.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
and
It is.
also, I suppose he's somebody with his own private artistic project, which is basically making a sort of snuff movie.
Yeah.
And well, not that we're all trying to make snuff movies, but we're you and I are making these podcasts, and lots of people have their own sort of artistic projects that they're running on the side, as it were, or passion projects,
Exactly.
which I
And every day you
suppose,
can look on, sort of Twitter and TikTok and YouTube and that everyone's making little videos and talking to the camera and saying, "Hey, this is what's going on with
yeah,
me. This is what I think. This is how I feel. Have a look at this." And
exactly,
you're right. Now we have almost as a whole society rather than just an individual who's sort of squirreling away in his little loft apartment by himself, sort of obsessing about it. We're kind of as a society obsessing
yeah,
about capturing everything and documenting it.
exactly.
So
So essentially, the protagonist Mark Lewis is a creator, as as
yes,
they're
he
referred
is,
to now.
but thankfully not an influencer. Well, or at
Well,
least not too much.
no,
Hopefully.
it didn't. It doesn't get that far. Thankfully, exactly. But it does have some great, yeah, sort of great shots in it. One thing that was really good, where pencils fall out of his pocket from a height, and the sort of
Yes.
camera's right underneath, and these red pencils go down towards the camera, sort of like this.
Yeah, that's an
And
amazing moment. It's something to
yeah,
talk about because the film does a really good job of really because in a because he's a serial killer and he's doing all these horrible things, but the film really does kind of you almost catch yourself kind of rooting for him in a
yeah,
sense And that's a great scene where that happens, and you're literally kind of going, like, I caught myself going, oh, he's going to get caught. But
Exactly.
then you kind of think, well, actually, he's the bad guy here.
Yeah, yeah,
We want him to get caught, don't we? But I mean, that is, I think, part of the response that the film had, is that, whereas that's much more of a trope now in these kind of things. At the
yeah,
time, I think people really didn't know what to make of this, and were quite taken aback by the what they perceived to be the immorality of it. I mean, obviously his acts are immoral, or however you want to phrase it. But what I mean is that because the film isn't is riding that sort of fine line between sympathizing with him and repulsing you at the same time by the acts that he's doing.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And it has some good dialogue. One of my favourite bits is that he's talking. I think he's talking about his glamour pictures, and somebody says, "You don't get that in Sight and Sound," which I thought was pretty
No,
good.
indeed.
The
One of
joke
my
is,
favorite lines was when the old geezer in the corner shop, he's buying the photographs, and then when he leaves the shop, the man who runs the shop turns to the main character and says, "I don't think he'll be doing the crossword tonight."
yeah, yeah,
It's just such a beautiful little line there. It's just very funny.
yes, yes.
Um,
It's good. And so one of the other things about this film that makes it quite sort of, I don't know, postmodern or meta is that there's a film that they're making within the film. So he's a focus pillar on a film and the film's called "The Walls Are Closing In." And I suppose this is something that sort of filmmakers like to do, is make films about filmmaking. And there's a few other examples in Sullivan's Travels, Preston Sturgis's film. They're making a film called "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?"
Brilliant.
And then the recently released Orson Welles film, The Other Side of the Wind, is all about a filmmaker trying to make a film as well.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, the name of this one, "The Walls Are Closing In," is just, I mean, this film could be called Peeping Tom or "The Walls Are Closing In," because the walls
Exactly.
definitely close in on the main character.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Did you have anything like about the performances in it? I mean, it's quite interesting. I'm not familiar with many other times that I've seen him in films, but the Carl Bohm.
Yeah, well, I think
Um,
most of his films were in Germany and Austria. He's the son of a he was an Austrian son of a famous
yeah,
conductor, I
Carl
believe.
Bohm. Yeah, the conductor, who's quite famous orchestra conductor.
Oh,
You
okay.
know, so yeah, I mean, I always find his recordings could be quite turgid and a bit dull
Oh,
myself, but
okay.
he does have his admirers and fans and things.
Well,
Um, but I had no idea until later, when I was reading about the film after I'd watched it. I had no idea that this was his son
right.
playing the lead in it, and yeah, so that was an interesting
Very interesting. Yeah.
point
Well, I
there.
don't know
Yeah.
anything about his music, but it's one thing I did find about that is that he's sort of Austrian, but this is obviously in London, or he's German, Austrian German, and he's speaks with a Austrian or German accent, and
Mm.
he's been brought up in London. You slightly wonder, well, how did he get this accent? I
Yeah.
mean, most people who've got sort of parents from uh, a different country would their children would have the language, would have the accent of the place that they're brought up, not their parents. I mean, that's everybody I know anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your children have sort of, you know, English accents, don't they?
They do indeed. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that was sort of making me thinking it was sort of slightly strange casting to sort of that was another sort of uh, postmodern device or whatever it is that a bit like Nick Rogue putting all these musicians in his films,
Yeah.
which is a sort of way of sort of making you realize the artifice of the film rather than sort of get engaged with it.
Well, and it may be because I suppose they don't really explain that or make any attempt to draw attention to that.
No.
And it could be that it just gives him, because I mean his English is very strong,
Oh
and
yeah,
but it just gives him that little touch of the outsider. It just
that's
adds
true.
that little extra element of like, because his speech is a little bit different from everyone else's,
That's
so
true.
maybe that was what it was. But I think I'd read that the director knew him and was sort of friends with him,
Oh,
or
okay.
they had some previous working relationship or something. So
Right.
that was one of the reasons why he ended up getting the part. I'm not sure he was the first choice for it either. I think they
Oh,
talked about
okay.
Dirk Bogarde and maybe one or two others, but those didn't work out for whatever
Right.
reason. So then they approached this young man to do it instead. So,
Right.
but I think, I mean, he's amazing in it. He
Yeah.
really
Yeah. He
adds
is.
to it, and is very effective in it, and and it does really capture the that obsessive quality of the creative impulse, but kind of takes you to the dark side of it. So it's quite an amazing film.
Definitely. Two about the performances. Anna Massey, who's the lodger downstairs, who
Mm,
they have a sort of relationship. I mean, she's terrific in it. Plays this
she
very sort
is.
of innocent, beautiful young woman. And then it also has Moira Shearer, who is the heroine in The Red Shoes,
Yes.
and she's also in the Tales of Hoffmann. She's a dancer, and she does a little dance in this as well, and
Yeah.
which is a nice touch. And then the other thing that really sort of stood out was the psychologist, who is, I think, a Czech actor, and he was, a psychiatrist, and I just he's just a sort of quite amusing sort of character, really,
Mm.
of that sort of, when I guess it's sort of a bit of a stereotype, but quite amusing at the same time. This sort of
Yeah.
Middle European
Yeah,
psychiatrist.
and I think I seem to remember just talking, just again from reading the wiki page, that the lady who plays one of the young ladies who has, poses for the pictures
Oh yeah.
for him, was somebody who was quite well known as a sort of a dancer. And apparently, I suppose depending on your outlook, this it would be a bit of a dubious honor, but the film is according to Wikipedia anyway, the first time that frontal nudity was shown in a British film,
Oh, okay.
apparently. So depending on how you feel about those kind of things, that's kind of an interesting point to make as well. Is that this was a 1960 British film, and the first time that it showed a naked woman,
Oh
or a
right.
partially naked
That's
woman.
interesting.
So
Yeah.
yes, so yeah, so this film has lots of little interesting historical points to it.
Yep.
I mean, I think just in the interest of time, we might have to think about moving on.
Definitely.
Was there any other points or things that you wanted to talk about in the
No.
film?
No. I mean, it's got some funny bits, shocking bits, moving bits, and yeah. There's no reason that. I mean, I understand why it's considered a masterpiece and why Martin Scorsese's so keen on it. And I saw that, well, old Michael Powell might not have made any more films, but he did work quite closely with Martin Scorsese, helping him make some of his films, I
Hmm.
believe. So he did have an input into sort of some great movies afterwards. So that's good.
Yeah, well, and to be fair, I mean, we mentioned the films that he was responsible for making before this one, and I think that's a pretty good life's work. And it is a shame, because you always can think about, like, well, what could have been had he had some more opportunities to make some more films, what we could have got from that. but at least he did make some all-time classics of the cinema.
Definitely.
So that's nothing to sneeze at, is it? Really,
Nope.
it's a bit of an understatement.
Yeah.
So okay, well, on that note, I think we'll take just a few seconds break.
Yep.
And then we're going to come back and talk about our second film, The Devils,
Sounds
in
good.
just a moment.
Look forward to it.
And we're back.
We're back.
Welcome back.
Hello,
So we've
listeners.
had a little rest. We've composed ourselves, and we're ready to move on with the next film now, called The Devils.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, this was your choice this week. So did you want to give us a little introduction?
Yes. So this film is by the great Ken Russell, who is one of the sort of big talents in post-war British film, I guess. And he made extremely cinematic films, very visual, big sort of statements. And often his films are about classical music, but not always. This one is about a sort of witch trial in a way. It stars Oliver Reed, the great Oliver Reed, as Father Grandier, who is basically the sort of leader of a town in France called Loudun. And the actual governor of the town has died, and he's become the sort of de facto leader before they find someone else. And the film is set during the reign of Louis XIII. That's the king, the father of Louis XIV, the Sun King. At this time, the other historical event, or the fictional event going on at this stage, is the Three Musketeers. So they were famously knocking around during the reign of Louis XIII. And the famous thing about Louis XIII is that he had an advisor called Father Richelieu. And Richelieu, something like that. Excuse my French. And he appears in this this film as well. And I think he's the baddie in the Three Musketeers, and he's basically the baddie in this one as well.
Yes, he was kind of like the advisor to the king, wasn't he? Or he became the de facto advisor. Like he had quite a bit of influence on the king, didn't he?
He did, yes, yeah. He did. In fact, when I was researching the film, I found a program about comparing Cardinal Richelieu to Peter Mandelson as this sort of shadowy figure in the background, sort of advising the boss. And
so, sorry, in case we didn't make clear to the listeners, like, this film is based on actual historical events, isn't it? Everything
it is.
that the film talks about are actually documented historical events that happened in France at this time.
Exactly.
I just wanted to make that clear in case listeners who aren't familiar with the film should probably know that.
And it's very true. So Oliver Reed is the leader of this town. He's the de facto governor, if not the actual governor. And the problem happens when the Richelieu sends somebody along to pull down the town walls, because this is during or the end of the wars of religion in France. And so they're fed up with all these little towns having too much independent power. And so
they were all kind of self-governing sort of little states within the state, weren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they want to pull down the walls, and partly because there's lots of Huguenots or Protestants in the town, which they don't like, and that if they don't have walls, they can't protect themselves. They can't protect the Protestants either, and apparently all the religions are living in harmony, which the authorities don't like. So they want to pull down the walls, and and Oliver Reed doesn't like that. So how are they going to get rid of him? There is Vanessa Redgrave, who is Sister Jean, and she basically has the hots for Father Grandier, seriously.
Well, everyone does it. It
Well, everybody
seems.
does.
Yeah.
He's this sort of, basically,
He's kind of like the cock of the walk, isn't he? He's like the proper, like strutting sort of rock star of the church and the
yes,
political scene of the town, and everybody admires and desires him, and he's, highly influential in the community, isn't he?
he's highly influential in the community and in the bedrooms of
Yes,
Loudon.
yes,
And anyway, so they basically managed to persuade Vanessa Redgrave to sort of testify against him that he is actually a sort of demon, or he's been using sort of witchcraft to bewitch her. And so begins his sort of downfall. And it's all about his downfall. And it's extraordinary film. Lots of amazing images in it, or scenes in it, from the very beginning, where it starts the play with the king, Louis XIII, sort of dressed as Aphrodite or Venus, sort of dancing
yes.
around.
An extraordinary opening where you're kind of like, what the hell's going on? And this guy emerges out of the mists in this extraordinary outfit
Yeah,
to recite this thing, and it's absolutely extraordinary, and it starts really starts the tone of the film, doesn't it? That moment.
it does. It does. It's very
Yeah,
striking. He's
yeah.
sort of scantily clad, just wearing a sort of bikini, basically.
Yes.
And and so it goes on from there. And Father Grandier is, this is, I guess, Oliver Reed's greatest role, or one of his
I,
greatest
I
roles.
think you could definitely make the argument that this is probably one of his key roles. He's absolutely extraordinary in it, kind of perfectly cast,
Perfectly cast.
and and I mean, I haven't had time to finish it, unfortunately, because there's only so many hours in the day. And, Jonathan and I do this podcast on top of our, day jobs and our families and other sort of commitments. So, unfortunately, I haven't been able to have time to finish the book, but I've started reading the book that was at least partially uh, that the film was partially based on, called the Devils of Loudun, which was written by Aldous Huxley,
Yeah.
which was his sort of account of this real historical incident. And it's interesting to read about the description of Grandier in real life, that he
All
really
right.
was this incredible egotist, and had this incredible power over people to ingratiate himself to people in society. And the film really does and Oliver Reed, sorry, does a great job in the film of in the initial stages of the film. He really is this, you know, um, alpha male,
He's
very, like, in a bit of a dandy, like making,
he's
he's
got
really
an
obsessed
amazing
with his look.
moustache.
Yes, and he's just got this. He sort of oozes egotism in every sense of the word. Like, he's very much sort of like he's found himself in this position of power in this community, and he revels in it, and
Yeah.
he loves it, and he enjoys the power, and he's a bit arrogant and disdainful of the other people in the community, the other sort of higher people of higher social standing, like the merchants and the more wealthy people in the town. He kind of feels this real sense of power.
Yeah.
And the film, in a sense, is the thing that I most like, that I find, in terms of partly how I interpret the film, is the fact that through the course of the film and through these events, this is somebody who, at first, is using his position and he's taking advantage of it to sort of satisfy his egoism and his
Yeah.
lusts and
Very
his
much, especially his
things. But
lusts.
then, yes, and through the course of the film, he's suddenly confronted with having to reconcile that with his actual faith and
Yeah.
the position that he's in, because the events that are going out of control around him and are going to take away his power, he suddenly then has to reconcile, actually his faith and his religious faith and his when all those around him are abusing that.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of an extraordinary kind of turn, and he does a great job of that through the course of the film, about that sort of sudden realization. Is like, oh, I've actually got to put my money where my mouth is here now, and I have to stand up for something.
Yeah.
And it's so that's really amazing.
Yeah. I guess in some ways the film's a sort of a story of a witch hunt, because I mean he's sort of accused of witchcraft, and it's a
Yes,
bit like The Crucible, Arthur Miller's play,
yeah,
and I think it's been turned into a film as well, or any number of these sort of witch trial, witch hunt films, where
yes,
basically a community sort of turns on a sort of, maybe, I mean, in this case, not exactly innocent person. He's definitely flawed, massively flawed,
yes.
but he's got enough. He's made enough mistakes to sort of get the people who count to sort of come for him.
Yes, and then this accusation, which is really brought out of frustration, because I think the Vanessa Redgrave, who also is just absolutely extraordinary in this
Yeah,
film, like just like mesmerizing and amazing. Um, but her character is very much just sort of frustrated and sort of really craving attention.
yeah,
And she brings up early in the film, when she's discussing with another woman who's come to, who wants to join this convent that she's in. She explains to her that a lot of the women who are here are not here because were necessary devout Christians, or really sort of believe it. They were kind of forced by economics or social circumstances to have to go into these places.
yes,
And she obviously is one, because she's got like a physical deformity, like a
yeah,
hunchback,
yeah,
and so obviously, um, she feels like frustrated, and like she is filled with all these desires and things that are unfulfilled, and she's living in this very confining, restrictive sort of atmosphere,
yeah,
and that manifests itself, and that's how she ends up making these accusations. And then these are used as like a political tool by Grandier's enemies within the city, and Richelieu, the cardinal. They seize upon this as an opportunity to get him out of the way, so that they can do what they want
yeah,
and take over the city.
exactly, exactly. And but that sort of doesn't in some ways it doesn't do justice to the magnificence of the film, which is full of
Yes,
these. So not only after that initial scene where you've got the play, this sort of 17th century play with the king playing Aphrodite, but it also has lots of just amazing. That the sets are designed by Derek Jarman, who
yeah,
went on to become a film director himself, and apparently they were the largest sets in Pinewood since they'd made Cleopatra, sort of 10 years before.
yeah, just extraordinary. These big, huge white brick sort of walls and
Yeah,
spires and things are just amazing.
absolutely
And the
incredible.
interiors are these all like really confined spaces that look like, they're all tiled up, and they kind of look like sort of like a like public urinals.
Yeah, they do a
And
bit.
a lot
Yeah,
of yeah,
the
some of them,
convent's
and
all
then
white.
bars everywhere.
Yeah, the cathedral's all black, and
Yeah,
yeah, the outside is all sort of white, and these sort of extraordinary look. I think one of their influences was Metropolis, the Fritz Lang film. So this sort of
yeah.
epic scale, and
And there's one bit that where it looks like a prison, like it's inside the Cardinals, sort of, the big church in France. I'm sorry, like it's some kind of cathedral, but the interior is all. It looks like like a prison, like you would see something like out of Escape from Alcatraz or something.
Yeah.
They're in a library, but all the everything, there's bars everywhere and these sort of ladders that
Yes.
kind of, and it looks like a
It
prison
does look like a prison.
almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much like a prison.
So
And Richelieu is being pushed along on a sort of trolley, which is quite
yes,
weird.
yeah, he never walks. They never show him walking. There's always somebody carrying him or pushing him along,
Yeah.
and there's always there's these really weird sort of touches that are really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and one of the sort of key scenes in the film is this bit that I think really has, in fact, it hasn't really been seen since sort of the early 70s, except I think
Yeah,
once 20 years ago they managed to find these lost bits of the film. So there's essentially when they're trying to the authorities are trying to crack down on Grandier.
yeah.
He's gone off to see the king because he believes the king will, is a decent man and will sort of doesn't want to do this, doesn't will make an exception in their case. They won't have to pull down the walls and they can stay independent and tolerant and all that sort of stuff. And so, whilst he's gone, somehow the sexual frustration of the nuns reaches a pitch, and they have this sort of orgy. And this scene where there's lots of nudity, and all the nuns basically take off their clothes and start sort of cavorting and frolicking.
Just to clarify, so it makes sense for the audience, that basically this nun claims to have been possessed by Grandier, or that he comes to visit her and possesses her to make her do all these sort of perverted sexual activities with her and the other nuns.
Yeah.
And then they bring in this guy who's just this amazing, he's got a long cape and he's wearing the gloves and he's dressed like kind of a 70s kind of glam rock band member with his long flowing hair. And he comes in and he's quite extraordinary. He talks like this and he's got this big deep voice and everything's really, like this.
Yeah.
And but he's come to perform an exorcism
He's the
on the
exorcist,
nuns.
isn't he?
Yes. And so, we have some quite sort of very, unpleasant and horrifying moments where they subject the nuns to these, exorcism procedures.
Yeah.
But then it all ends in like what you were just building up to. So I'll let you describe it now.
Yeah. So this orgy is part of the exorcism, and I think they're they think they're getting rid of the demons whilst he's doing his sort of prayers or whatever it is. And so there's this long scene, but I have the DVD, which is you can see here.
Yes, from the BFI.
From
again.
the BFI.
We're always plugging the BFI.
Yep. And
you're welcome.
But I think it's missing 5 minutes of that scene because it was deemed too controversial. But it wasn't deemed too controversial by the BBFC, the British Board of Film Classification. That's Warner Brothers itself has thought it was too much. And it's still, even though, and you still can't watch those 5 minutes.
Yes.
And so
this film has a long and troubled history. Like it was apparently very commercially successful at the time it was released, partly because, Ken Russell at the time was at the kind of the height of his career. He'd just come off of making Woman in Love, which is another amazing film. And this was his next big project. And he had a nice lavish budget to work with and big stars, and it was a huge thing. But then, but there was a lot of issues with the censors, both during the production and after the production.
Yeah,
it's quite an extraordinary story because there's a great documentary on that DVD that goes along with it. That talks about the production history and the censorship history behind it. And it's just extraordinary to think at this time that people used to submit their scripts to the censor board even before they'd started filming. Right. And that these people had such influence that they would actually go with their scripts cap in hand and say, do you think this is going to be all right before we start shooting? Do you think there's going to be any problems here. And these guys would be able to kind of go, oh, we don't like this bit. You probably shouldn't do that. And, oh, no, don't take that bit out and don't film that because I think that might be a bit much. And, it's amazing to think that these guys had that much influence just even on the creative process going into it.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, once the film was made, you're quite right that although there was a bit of negotiating with the British Board of Film Classification in terms of making a few adjustments, the film did, because I think they recognized Ken Russell's talent and the artistic merit of the film.
Yeah.
But it was actually the distributor, Warner Brothers, who in the end said, we can't do that. We can't put that out. It's too much.
Yeah.
So they had some of these bits removed from the film.
Yeah.
And to this day, you can't see it, can you? Really, in its complete form?
You cannot.
And even now, that DVD that you're holding now is the only way that you can see it. That's the only kind of proper commercial release that the film has ever had on home video.
Yes.
I mean, it's been out, it was out on VHS back in the sort of, the 80s or whatever, but really that DVD is the first time that Warner Brothers licensed it out officially to a distributor to release it. But there were conditions, and one of them was that they couldn't release it on Blu-ray. They could only release it on DVD.
Oh, really?
So there's no high definition version out there. And there's also they could not reinstate those scenes that you mentioned that had been removed during the film's original run, because I think it was Mark Commode who had done some research and actually tracked down the missing footage.
He found it in the archives, didn't he?
He did, and they did reinstate it for a broadcast on British television on Channel 4 years ago. And as it happens, I actually have a recording of that. So I do have a copy of that here.
All right.
Please don't contact me for it, because I'm not going to be able to help you with that. But but really, and even on streaming services, you can't get The Devils.
Nowhere.
Although apparently in America, every once in a while they kind of eke it out for a few months and then take it away again.
Oh, okay.
And it's an edited version that's not even as long as the one that's on that DVD. So It is a film that, for whatever reason, is not been readily available and hasn't been restored to its full, to the full original version as Ken Russell had intended it to be.
There is a petition on change.org that calls to release the full director's cut of Ken Russell's The Devils, which is still live. You can go there and add your name to it. But one of the things I wanted to mention is that although this is part of the moral outrage theme, and it's funny that Warner Brothers was the ones that outraged, because in that documentary Hell on Earth, the desecration and resurrection of the devils, that you can also find on YouTube, where you can watch it for free as well. And there they have a chap called Peter Malone, who was a Catholic priest and president of the World Catholic Association for Communication. And he says, I think that the full version should be released. And so that and he's a sort of, I guess, if not a spokesman for the Vatican, but he's certainly for the Roman Catholic Church. Mark Commode, the famous film critic, he's a massive fan of the film. He's a regular churchgoer, and I believe Ken Russell, certainly at the time, was Catholic as well. And so it may be shocking, but it's not frivolous. And
no, not at all. And it's not meant. I mean, this film, if anything, it kind of examines faith, questions faith.
Yeah.
And the critic, it casts a critical eye on sort of institutions and how they use religious doctrine to manipulate and control, situations and use it politically, and that is kind of what the film's about. But it's also very much about one person individually who finds their faith, as I mentioned when we started talking about the
Yeah.
character who suddenly has to reconcile what he really believes in and has to stand up for
Yeah.
in this situation. And I think the film, is about that. Ultimately, it is a film that reaffirms faith and some of those things,
Definitely.
and it is positive in that sense. There is a lot of strong, like the Vanessa Redgrave's character has these extraordinary kind of hallucinatory kind of visions and sort of these scenes that are quite extraordinary, where she's in her kind of lustful imaginings while she's thinking about Grandier. She
Yeah.
imagines him in various scenarios, like at one point he's up on the cross, and there's kind of things like that. Um, but they fit in with her characterization and sort of emphasize the kind of the things that she's going through psychologically, and I
Yes.
don't think they're really meant to be offensive in that sense, like just like you say, just to be frivolous and provocative just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
I think they're meant to be these ecstatic visions of her psychology, really.
Definitely. Yeah. Really extraordinary. And I guess another thing that makes me think of, pardon me, the current day, its relevance is, I mean, I guess any sort of witch trial film has a sort of perennial relevance. But one thing here is it talks about torture. And of course, torture has been in the news, well, at least in the last 20 years,
Mm,
and how it basically produces the results you want it to produce, or tends to.
of course.
Uh,
Yeah.
exactly. And the music's extraordinary. That
Mm,
was by Peter Maxwell Davies as well.
yes.
Yes, and it's sort of very atonal, much of it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Discordant kind of, things that really add to the atmosphere and stuff. Yeah, it's amazing.
exactly,
Amazing.
exactly.
There's so much about this. I mean, I don't know how adequately we've really conveyed the sort of the visual. I mean, Ken Russell's, all of his films, he always has this incredible visual style and creates these amazing sort of images, and the costumes and the sets and everything are all extraordinary. The performances, and it's very disturbing and very thought provoking film.
Yeah,
Um, and
couldn't.
that last image, the closing image, which obviously, because we're trying to avoid spoilers here, but I would just say that last shot that the film ends on is absolutely, extraordinary.
Yes, yeah, it is. It's a great film. I mean, it is 18, so it definitely deserves that.
I mean, although it's a drama, it's kind of like an historical drama, but you could almost categorize this as a horror film in a sense, couldn't
Yeah,
you?
you
Because
could.
there's a lot
Well,
of quite disturbing moments, and the behavior of a lot of the characters is horrendous, and you know
there's sort of
it was.
hysteria, basically mass hysteria, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, and almost like a carnival, like the whole thing with The Exorcist, and those
Hmm.
moments. It becomes like they had like a viewing gallery where the public could come in and
Hmm.
leer and sort of watch all these horrible things going on, and it was
Yeah.
almost like they were putting on a show. And there's almost that great moment with the king when he comes in and he basically shows them up for what's really going on, and it's that
Yes.
really wonderful moment that's very funny and sort of really sums up the real sort of message of the film in a sense.
Well, the King's a
Um,
great character.
oh, he's amazing. He's brilliant, brilliant. And the little moment with the blackbirds
Yeah.
is quite amazing as well.
Yeah. I mean,
The
there's not much that isn't, that's sort of boring in this film. There's just, it's
No,
one extraordinary moment after another.
no, exactly.
Sort of,
I guess it suffice to say, because we've kind of cracked our hour point. but I guess to say to people out there who might have tuned in who are familiar with the film, I'm sure you'll kind of agree in some of the points, and we'd love to hear from you as well if you have any other things that you wanted to add or wanted to talk about. If you've never seen The Devils or Peeping Tom, we highly, highly recommend that you go and
Yeah.
search them out. The Devils is a bit more tricky, as we've talked about. Jonathan held up the DVD, but that is still in print and available from the BFI.
Yes.
I had an extraordinary conversation. I was out for dinner with some friends last night, and I asked someone if they still had a Blu-ray or a DVD player, and they said no. And I was kind of completely
Gosh.
taken aback by that. But it is true that a lot of people now that streaming has become the kind of dominant way that people consume their media, their films and TV shows and
Yeah.
things, that a lot of people have just completely, and it seems to me like a little bit of a reactionary thing to do, like because streaming's more convenient and everybody's got these subscriptions to these services now, they've all kind of thrown away all their DVDs and Blu-rays and got rid of their players. And
It's foolish.
I've found times when I've walked down the street and people that have left sort of milk crates full of DVDs and videos out on their front lawn with a sign saying "Help yourself."
I haven't
Like they're
seen
just
these.
giving them away and trying to get rid of them.
Dang.
So then you have so now it's like you're completely at the mercy of these corporate streaming entities who basically have complete control over what you can see and what you can't see.
Absolutely.
And you're ending up paying a monthly subscription for stuff that you probably already had sitting on your shelf and you threw them away.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I find that quite like an extraordinary thing, that people haven't kept their machines and stuff. Just that happens a lot with technology because when CDs came in, everybody threw all their records away, and then when now everyone's throwing all their CDs away and they use sort of Spotify and whatever else, Apple Music. So it's kind of like when the new technology comes and displaces, there's this wholesale, just sort of trashing of everything before.
In my loft, David, I have a box or a number of boxes of 78s. So they're
brilliant.
As well as tapes and
well, thank God,
CDs.
Because obviously I still collect physical media, and I think there's something about it. Maybe it's just a generational thing, but I think having a physical artifact that you can hang on to and actually own and is a completely different experience. And they come with little books, and they have extra contextual stuff that come with them. And once you have it, it's on your shelf and it's there when you want it, and you're not at the mercy of whether someone at Disney decides we don't want you to see that anymore, or our license has run out, so we're going to have to take that off. So you've got it. You have your favorites there, and they're available for you to watch.
Absolutely.
So I find it extraordinary. But if you want to watch The Devils, that is what you need. There's a DVD from the BFI that's available.
There is indeed.
And it's amazing. It's still in print. I checked today before we went on because I wanted to make sure that it was still around. So go out and get it. It's a really good, it's a DVD, so it's not high definition, but it is a good quality. The BFI always, their videos are always top quality. It's a good transfer, and it's well encoded, and it's got lots of extra stuff on it.
Two DVDs, in fact.
Yeah, there's two DVDs. One has the film on it, and then the other one has all kind of like a documentary and has some other background stuff. And I think there's a couple of Ken Russell short films on there that kind of thematically fit in with the film. And I would also, BFI's also collected, they do a great, there's a couple of box sets that collect Ken Russell's early television films, like his films about famous composers and artists and things like that. And those were the films that kind of made his name, established him before he moved into features. And I suspect, knowing about some of the episodes that we're planning in the future, I strongly suspect that Ken Russell is going to come up soon again in the context of a swap here, because we've got another show coming up in the next couple of episodes, and I suspect Ken Russell might come up again, just as a little foreshadowing there of the future. And all the more reason, listeners, why you might want to follow or subscribe to the show, because we got lots of really interesting things coming up. As I mentioned, we've got some cool guests that we're lining up. And we've also got some cool themes coming up in some future shows.
And leave a
search
review.
out Peeping.
Good
yeah,
review.
Sorry, I'm not sure about Peeping Tom's status availability.
Oh, yes, I'm going to tell you. I know about this. So I watched it on Amazon Prime.
Brilliant.
And I think I had to rent it, but it was $1.99. And it's also on YouTube. In the UK at least, and it's also $1.99. So those
bargain.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth. It's less than a pint of beer. So I would definitely recommend it.
Well, I was very fortunate again. I have a Blu-ray from Optimum Releasing. It's licensed, I think Studio Canal are the current license holders of that film. But so I watched that Blu-ray, and I'm pretty sure you can still get that as well. So if you are still into physical media, I'm sure it's readily available if you just go to Amazon or another online retailer. Yes. I'm sure it should be very easy to arrange for the postman to slip it through your letterbox.
Definitely.
Without much fuss. And it's definitely worth it, because both of these films are really, really great and definitely worth checking out. And I think one of the reasons why we called the episode Moral Outrage is not so much because of the films that give offense, but just the fact that they were maligned and treated unfairly during their initial release.
Oh, and also the Devil still is.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And the fact that the Devil's is not readily and freely available in its most complete form. So I think from our point of view, that is a moral outrage. So I think that's kind of, where we were going with that. The title has a kind of a double meaning, So on that note, listeners, I think we're going to wrap it up. And we hope you've enjoyed the show. And by all means, if you have anything that you want to comment on, or any suggestions or things that you want to talk to us about, you can find us on Twitter at FilmSwapUK. We're on YouTube at FilmSwap_podcast. And you can also find us on Facebook. Just look for Film Swap the podcast. We've got a page on there. And by all means, drop us a line. Come find us and come say hello. I wanted to just briefly say that there have been a couple of people who've reached out to us, sort of sent us messages via Twitter and other things to say some nice, friendly, encouraging words. And so I want to thank you for reaching out to us and saying hi. So we appreciate that. And thanks for listening.
See everybody soon.
Okay, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.